I am Captain Elena Vaughan. While my squad calls me Maverick for my grit in this $120 million estate, my father calls me a mistake. Tonight, at Calvin Vaughn's retirement party in the Hamptons, in front of 300 guests enjoying lobster and champagne, my father snatched the microphone and pointed at my uniform. Look at my failed daughter. I wish you died on the battlefield so I could collect the death gratuity check instead of seeing your coarse face here shaming the family. The room burst into laughter, sharper than shrapnel. They think I will bow my head and cry like always. But they do not know, Uncle Vernon just slipped a red, wax-sealed envelope into my hand. A secret, marching order from my grandfather's grave. Comment, justice, and subscribe if you believe a soldier's honor cannot be bought with dirty money. It is time to counterattack. The Vaughan estate tonight was blazing like a lighthouse of arrogance against the dark Atlantic sky. More than 200 guests, the creme de la creme of New York's upper crust, had gathered on the manicured lawn. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt, fighting a losing battle against clouds of Chanel No. 5 and the metallic tang of fresh oysters. I stood pressed against a Corinthian marble pillar, trying to make myself as small as possible. I felt like an ugly, jagged scar on a perfect oil painting. I was wearing my dress blues. To me, this uniform was sacred. The fabric was stiff, professional, and heavy with the weight of tradition. On my chest sat the Bronze Star, a medal I had exchanged for blood and the lives of good men in the dust of Afghanistan. But here, in the Hamptons, these medals were viewed as nothing more than cheap costume jewelry. I could feel their eyes sliding over me. They were gazes filled with pity, or worse, amusement. I heard the distinct, sharp whisper of a socialite dripping in diamonds standing near the ice sculpture. "Is that the youngest Vaughan daughter?" she murmured behind her fan, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "She looks like hired security, doesn't she? How tragic for Calvin to have a child so coarse." I tightened my jaw, my molars grinding together. Duty, honor, country. I repeated General MacArthur's words in my head like a prayer, trying to build a bunker around my heart. I was a United States Army captain. I had led soldiers through ambushes. I could survive a cocktail party. Then, the double mahogany doors threw open and the atmosphere shifted. Malik walked in. If I was the scar, my brother was the spotlight. He strode onto the terrace like he owned the very air we breathed. He was wearing a bespoke Armani suit that probably cost more than a sergeant's annual salary. In his hand, a crystal tumbler of Johnny Walker Blue Label swirled, catching the light. That arrogant, lazy smile was plastered on his face, the smile of a man who has never been told no in his entire 35 years of life. Calvin, my father, immediately abandoned his conversation with a sitting senator. He practically sprinted across the patio, his arms wide. "There he is!" Calvin bellowed, his voice booming with a pride he had never, not once, shown to me. "The future of Vaughan Holdings, the prince has arrived." The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Malik soaked it in, basking in the adoration. As he made his way to the front, he passed right by my pillar. He didn't stop, but he leaned in just close enough, deliberately checking his shoulder hard against mine. "Still alive, Captain?" he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and rot. "I thought you'd be buried in a desert somewhere by now." My hands, resting by my sides, curled into fists so tight my fingernails cut into the palms. The discrimination wasn't subtle anymore. It was naked, displayed right here under the chandeliers for everyone to see. A sharp clink, clink, clink of a spoon against a crystal glass silenced the murmurs. Calvin stepped up to the podium. The spotlight hit him, illuminating his flushed, self-satisfied face. He spent 5 minutes spewing hollow, flowery words about legacy and hard work, words that tasted like ash coming from a man who measured human worth in stock options. Then his eyes found me in the shadows. The warmth vanished from his face. "Tonight I am handing full power to Malik," Calvin announced, his voice turning into a cold steel blade. "As for Elena..." He raised a finger, pointing it straight at my face. It felt less like a finger and more like the barrel of a loaded gun. "You are the greatest disappointment of my life," he declared. The amplification system carried his venom to every corner of the estate. "You chose to be a pawn on a battlefield because you knew you were too stupid for the boardroom. I declare it now. You will not inherit a single dime." The silence was absolute. You could hear the waves crashing on the beach below. But Calvin wasn't finished. He wanted to draw blood. "Honestly," he sneered, I wish that death notification telegram you sent home years ago had been real. At least then I could have collected the death gratuity check. It would have been better than seeing your coarse failure of a face standing here, shaming this family. The shock hit me physically, like a punch to the gut. He wished I was dead for the money. The crowd stood frozen for a second, and then it started. A nervous tittering. Then a chuckle. And finally, a wave of cruel, sharp laughter spread through the audience like a disease. They were laughing at a soldier being wished dead by her own father. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. I didn't care about the inheritance. I didn't care about the money. But the cruelty? It was absolute. Desperate, drowning in the humiliation, I turned my head. I looked for Renee, my mother. She was standing right next to Calvin, holding a glass of white wine. Her knuckles were white. "Mom, please," I begged silently, staring at her profile. "Say something. Defend me. Just once." Renee felt my gaze. I saw her hesitate. But then, she lowered her head. She fixed her eyes intently on her Jimmy Choo shoes, refusing to look at me. She took a sip of wine, shrinking back into the shadow of her husband, choosing her comfort over her daughter's soul. In that moment, standing rigid in my dress blues, while 300 strangers laughed at my father's death wish, I realized the truth. I was an orphan. My parents were standing right there, breathing and alive, but I was completely and utterly alone. I snapped my heels together, my spine straightening by sheer reflex, locking my body into the position of attention. I would not let them see me break. But inside, the little girl who just wanted her dad to be proud, she died right there on that patio. And as the laughter grew louder, echoing in my ears, it triggered something dark, pulling me back to another time I stood alone, while this family laughed at my pain. That laugh. Melik's cruel, braying laughter echoing across the patio did not just hurt my ears, it was a time machine. It dragged me violently back 10 years to a night that smelled of ozone, wet asphalt, and fear. It was 2 a.m. A summer thunderstorm was hammering the Hamptons, turning the manicured lawns into mud. I was in my room, studying for my SATs, when the crash shook the house. I ran outside in my pajamas. There, wrapped around the neighbor's brick privacy wall, was my father's brand new Porsche 911 Carrera. Smoke was hissing from the engine block. And stumbling out of the driver's seat, reeking of tequila and vomit, was Malik. He was 25 then, jobless and completely wasted. The front door of our estate flew open. Calvin Vaughan stormed out. I expected him to grab Malik. I expected him to scream at the son who had just destroyed a $150,000 car and nearly killed himself. But Calvin walked right past Malik. He marched straight to me, standing barefoot in the rain. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like steel talons, and slapped me. The sound cracked louder than the thunder. "Why weren't you watching him?" Calvin screamed, his face purple with rage. "You useless parasite! You were supposed to be his keeper." I was 17. Malik was a grown man. Yet, in the twisted logic of the Vaughan household, his sins were my failures. When the police lights flashed blue against the rain, Calvin didn't panic. He went into CEO mode. He pulled the officers aside. I watched him write a check, his movements calm and practiced. Then he walked back to us. "Elena was driving," he told the officers, pointing at me. My blood ran cold. "Dad." "No," I whispered. "I don't even have my license yet." "Malik is applying to the Ivy League next month," Calvin hissed into my ear, his voice low and dangerous. "We are not letting a DUI ruin his future. You are a minor. The record will be sealed. You take the fall, or you get out of my house tonight." So, I took the fall. I stood in front of a judge and lied to protect the golden child. That juvenile record became a stain, a dirty mark I had to work 10 times harder than anyone else to scrub clean just to get a nomination for West Point. That was the moment I realized the truth. In this family, Malik was the asset, and I was the liability insurance. The day I received my acceptance letter to the United States Military Academy at West Point, I foolishly thought things would change. I ran into Calvin's study, placing the heavy cream-colored envelope on his mahogany desk. I was beaming, waiting for a "well done," or even just a nod. Calvin barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal. He glanced at the United States Army seal and scoffed. "Good," he muttered. "The military is the dumping ground for society's rejects. At least you will stop eating my food. Just don't expect me to come to your little parade." He didn't know that I wasn't running away. I was running towards something he could never buy. While Malik was burning through trust fund money throwing debauched parties in Manhattan penthouses, I was crawling through mud under barbed wire. While Malik was snorting lines in club bathrooms, I was learning how to lead men and women through the valley of the shadow of death. I built my honor from the dirt up. But the silence. The silence was the worst weapon. During my deployment to Afghanistan, in the freezing nights of the Kandahar province, I wrote home. I wrote hundreds of letters. I poured my heart out onto paper, describing the terror of mortar attacks, the dust that coated my lungs, and my desperate hope that my family was safe. I never received a single reply. Not one. For years, I thought they were just busy. It wasn't until a housekeeper whispered the truth to me years later that I understood. Calvin had intercepted every letter. He threw them, unopened, into the fireplace. Don't let her whining spoil the mood of the house, he had told my mother. Tonight, watching Calvin wrap his arm around Malik, I felt that old, familiar coldness in my chest. It was the same coldness I felt in the bunker, clutching a crumpled, water-damaged photo of a family that had emotionally executed me long ago. And for what? To protect a lie. Calvin always bragged that Malik was a business genius. But I had seen the books. My military training taught me to analyze intelligence, and the intelligence on Vaughan Holdings was terrifying. Every project Malik touched bled money. He had lost millions on failed tech startups and bad real estate deals. Calvin was covering it up. He was siphoning money from the corporate emergency reserves to plug the holes in Malik's sinking ship. I had tried to warn him during my last leave. Dad, I had said, showing him the spreadsheets. This is unsustainable. You are bleeding the company dry. He had laughed in my face. You just know how to shoot a gun, Elena. What do you know about macroeconomics? His blindness was total. He was willing to bankrupt his legacy just to avoid admitting his son was a failure. I looked at them now, the father who wished me dead and the brother who stole my life. The scripture my chaplain used to read to me came flooding back, Psalm 27, verse 10. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. I realized then that I could not save people who were determined to drown. I had spent my life being the scapegoat, the fixer, the punching bag. But the debt was paid. If you have ever been the one cleaning up the mess while being treated like the dirt, please hit that like button and comment, stand tall below. Let me know I am not shouting into the void tonight. I took a deep breath, letting the memories settle like dust after a storm. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a soldier who realizes the diplomatic mission has failed. It was time to retreat from this toxic territory. I turned my back on the podium, ready to walk away forever. But fate, and my Uncle Vernon, had other plans. I did not run. A soldier does not run from the enemy. She conducts a tactical withdrawal. Inside my mind, a switch flipped. The hurt child who wanted her father's love was shoved into a locker, and the captain took command. I executed a sharp, about-face movement, my heels pivoting on the polished marble with a snap that would have satisfied my drill sergeants at West Point. I marched toward the exit. My dress shoes, with their hard military soles, struck the floor with a rhythmic, hollow clack, clack, clack that cut through the soft jazz and the murmuring crowd. I kept my chin parallel to the ground, my eyes fixed on the double brass handles of the main entrance. I was exfiltrating a hostile zone. But Malik wasn't finished. He was high on adrenaline and cheap power, and he wanted to make sure the wound was fatal. Don't forget to use the back door, Elena. His voice boomed over the speakers, distorted by feedback. The front entrance is for VIPs, not for security staff, and hey, make sure you return that costume to the surplus store before you go back to the barracks. You look like a man in that thing. The crowd laughed again. It was a wet, sloppy sound, fueled by free champagne and the cruelty of the mob. The humiliation chased me down the hallway, nipping at my heels like a pack of wild dogs. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to sprint, to burst through those doors, jump into my old pickup truck, and drive until the gas tank ran dry. I reached the door. My hand closed around the cold, heavy brass handle. I was 1 second away from freedom. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto my forearm. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was firm, like iron wrapped in velvet. I spun around, defensive instincts flaring, ready to strike. It was Uncle Vernon. Calvin's younger brother, the family's chief legal counsel, stood in the shadows of the grand staircase. He looked nothing like my father. Where Calvin was round, loud, and flushed with excess, Vernon was gaunt, gray, and silent. He smelled of old law books and stale tobacco. He had spent 40 years cleaning up the Vaughan family's messes, his face a permanent mask of neutral exhaustion. "Don't go just yet, soldier," Vernon rasped. His voice was rough, like gravel crunching under tires. He pulled me deeper into the alcove, away from the prying eyes of the waitstaff. "You walk out that door now, and they win. You become exactly what they say you are, a runaway, a failure." "They made their choice, Vernon," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I have no business here." "Correct. You have no business with them," Vernon agreed, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "But you have business with him." He reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. It wasn't the crisp white stationery of the modern Vaughan Holdings legal department. This paper was cream-colored, textured, and slightly yellowed with age. But it was the seal that stopped my heart. On the back, holding the flap shut, was a blob of red wax. Pressed into the wax was the impression of a soaring eagle, the original family crest my grandfather used before Calvin rebranded everything with modern, soulless logos. "This isn't a parting gift," Vernon whispered, pressing the envelope into my hands. It felt heavy, substantial. "This is a direct marching order from the supreme commander of this family, your grandfather, Otis." I looked down at the envelope. My name, Captain Elena Vaughan, was written in blue ink. The handwriting was slanted, sharp, and forceful. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 10 years, not since the day of his funeral. "He wrote this 3 days before he died," Vernon explained, his eyes darting toward the ballroom where Malik was now toasting himself. "He made me swear an oath. I was to keep this in my personal safe and deliver it to you only at the exact moment Calvin officially named an heir, not a minute before." I ran my thumb over the wax seal. I could feel the ridges of the eagle's wings. Why me? Grandpa Otis was a terrifying figure to most. A hardened Marine who fought in the Pacific theater of World War II. He was a man of few words. I always thought he looked at me with indifference. "Why?" I asked, looking up at Vernon. "Because he knew," Vernon said simply. "He knew Calvin was weak. He knew Malik was rotten. And he knew you were the only one with the spine to carry the weight." I looked back at the ballroom doors. Through the frosted glass, I could see the blurred shapes of the people who had just stripped me of my dignity. I could leave. I could take this letter, read it in the safety of my car, and drive away. It would be the safe choice. But then I remembered the creed. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. My grandfather wasn't just my ancestor. He was a Marine. He was a comrade. And his legacy was currently being urinated on by a drunk narcissist in an Armani suit. A cold, deadly calm washed over me. The shaking in my hands stopped. My breathing slowed. It was the same feeling I got right before kicking down a door in a raid. The fear evaporated, replaced by a singular, crystal-clear objective. "What's inside, Uncle Vernon?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, losing its tremor. Vernon smiled, a rare, dry twitch of his lips. "The truth. And a nuclear weapon that will blow your father's little comedy show to smithereens. Do you have the guts to pull the trigger?" I didn't answer him with words. I reached down to my belt, concealed beneath the tailored jacket of my dress blues. With a smooth, practiced motion, I unsheathed my M9 bayonet. The matte black steel blade caught the dim light of the hallway. It was a tool of war, completely out of place in this mansion of fragile egos. Vernon didn't flinch. He nodded approvingly. I looked at the red wax seal one last time. "Sorry, Grandpa. I'm coming in hot." I slid the tip of the bayonet under the flap of the envelope. With a sharp, decisive motion, I sliced it open. Rip. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the silence, like a gunshot. I wasn't just opening a letter, I was declaring war. "Let's go, Uncle Vernon," I said, sheathing the knife. "It is time to teach them about chain of command." As the thick paper tore open, a scent wafted out that nearly brought me to my knees. It was cherry Cavendish pipe tobacco. Instantly, the cold hallway of the Hamptons estate vanished. I was 6 years old again, sitting cross-legged on a Persian rug in front of a roaring fireplace, listening to a gruff voice tell stories about the black sands of Iwo Jima and the jungles of Guadalcanal. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of Grandpa Otis. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a sudden, overwhelming intimacy. It felt as if my grandfather was standing right there beside me, his ghostly hand resting on my shoulder, shielding me from the vultures in the ballroom. Inside the envelope lay a stack of dense legal documents and a single, folded sheet of cream-colored stationery. The paper was yellowed at the edges, brittle with time. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted, and forceful, written with a fountain pen that dug deep into the fiber of the paper. To Captain Elena Vaughan, it began. He used my rank. Not Elena, not granddaughter, but captain. He acknowledged the soldier before the child. If you are reading this, it means my son, your father, has failed completely. It means he has chosen vanity over virtue, and I am forced to activate my final contingency. I leaned against the wall, my vision blurring. The muffled bass of the party music thumped through the door, a vulgar contrast to the sacred words in my hands. I know they call you a failure, Elena. I know they look down on your service. But listen to me. I did not build Vaughan Holdings for men who wear Italian suits but have empty souls. I built it on discipline, on honor, the very things you chose to forge in the fire of the army. A single tear escaped, hot and fast, tracking through the makeup I had applied so carefully that morning. You didn't join the army to run away, Elena. That was the test. I needed to know if you had the steel to survive without my money. I have watched every step. I saw you earn that bronze star. While your parents see a mistake, I see the only stone left in this family capable of bearing the weight of my legacy. You are not the black sheep, soldier. You are the shepherd. I choked back a sob. For 10 years, I believed I was unloved. I thought I was garbage. But the old man, the founder of this empire, had been watching me from the shadows the whole time. He hadn't abandoned me. He was waiting for me to be ready. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at the second part of the package. Underneath the letter was a dossier, compiled by a private investigator. It was dated just weeks before Otis died. I flipped through the pages, and the sadness in my chest hardened into a cold, jagged rock of fury. It was a forensic accounting of corruption. There were bank statements showing unauthorized transfers. Calvin hadn't just made bad business decisions, he was a thief. He had siphoned over $40 million from the employee pension fund. He was stealing the retirement savings of the janitors, the secretaries, and the mid-level managers, the people who actually worked for a living, to cover his tracks. And what was he covering? I turned the page and saw a medical file from the Blue Horizon Clinic in Zurich, Switzerland. Patient, Malik Vaughan. Admitted, August 2014. Diagnosis, acute heroin addiction. Patient, Malik Vaughan. Admitted, December 2015. Relapse. Patient, Malik Vaughan. Admitted, July 2018. Methamphetamine psychosis, 3 times. My parents had spent millions of stolen pension dollars to hide Malik in a 5-star rehab resort in the Swiss Alps, all while telling the world he was on business trips. They had committed federal crimes to protect a junkie and destroy a soldier. I closed the folder. My hand was steady now. The trembling was gone. Calvin wasn't just a cruel father, he was a criminal. He was standing on that stage right now, celebrating a career built on fraud, preparing to hand the detonator to a bomb named Malik. I carefully refolded the letter from Grandpa Otis. I unbuttoned the left breast pocket of my dress blues, the pocket that sat directly over my heart, and slid the letter inside. It felt like armor. I wiped the tear tracks from my cheeks with the back of my hand. There was no more room for sadness. Sadness was for victims. I was no longer a victim. I was the sword of justice that Otis Vaughan had left behind. I turned to Uncle Vernon. The old lawyer was watching me, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. Uncle Vernon, I said, my voice dropping into the low commanding register I used when briefing my platoon before a raid. Do you have the original corporate bylaws with you? Vernon tapped the side of his leather briefcase. Always, Captain. Certified and notarized. I nodded. I reached down and smoothed the front of my jacket. I checked the alignment of my ribbons. I brushed a speck of invisible dust from my trousers. I stood up to my full height, feeling the steel in my spine that the army had installed and Grandpa Otis had tempered. Good, I said, staring at the double doors. Then we are going back in. Vernon stepped forward to open the door, but I held up a hand. No, I said. I'll open it. It is time to teach them a lesson about the chain of command. I gripped the cold brass handle again. This time, I wasn't leaving. I was breaching. The double doors swung open for the second time that night. But this time, there was no announcement, no applause, and definitely no laughter. I stepped across the threshold, Uncle Vernon flanking me on my right like a silent chief of staff. The soft, ambient jazz music was still playing, but the conversation in the room died instantly. Clack, clack, clack. My heels struck the marble floor with a rhythmic, military cadence that cut through the silence like a metronome, counting down to an explosion. I didn't look at the guests. I didn't look at the waiters holding trays of caviar. My eyes were locked on two targets standing on the raised platform at the far end of the room, Calvin and Malik. The crowd parted. They didn't move out of respect. They moved out of an instinctive, primal fear. They could feel the shift in atmospheric pressure. I wasn't the sad, rejected daughter anymore. I was a storm front moving in. Malik was the first to spot me. He was leaning against the DJ booth, holding a magnum bottle of champagne like a club, swaying slightly on his feet. His eyes narrowed, and a cruel, sloppy grin spread across his face. "Oh, look!" he shouted into his microphone, the feedback whining sharply. The brave little toy soldier came back. "What's the matter, Elena? Did you forget to ask Dad for bus fare? Or did you come back to beg the kitchen staff for a doggy bag to take back to your barracks?" A few sycophants near the front laughed, but it was nervous laughter. I didn't break stride. I walked straight up to him until I was standing toe to toe. Malik stepped down from the platform, blocking my path. He towered over me in his heels and height, smelling of sweat and expensive cologne. He looked down at my pristine dress blues with utter contempt. "You think wearing this Halloween costume scares anyone?" he sneered. "You look ridiculous." Then, he did the unthinkable. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his hand tilt the giant green bottle. I saw the liquid slosh over the rim. "Have a drink, loser," he mumbled. The pale gold champagne cascaded down. It splashed onto my left shoulder. It was cold and sticky. It ran down the dark blue wool of my uniform, soaking into the fabric. But it didn't just ruin the cloth. The alcohol washed over my ribbon rack. It dripped directly onto my bronze star, the medal I earned pulling a wounded sergeant out of a burning Humvee in the Kandahar Valley. It soaked the fabric covering my heart, seeping through to the very pocket where I had hidden Grandpa Otis's letter. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath sucked the air out of the ballroom. Disrespecting a uniform is a taboo in this country. It is a line you do not cross. But Malik didn't just cross it, he drowned it in alcohol. I stood frozen. I didn't flinch. I let the wine drip from my hem onto the floor, creating a puddle of evidence. I looked past Malik, straight at my father. Calvin was watching the whole thing from 5 feet away. I waited for the outrage. I waited for him to slap the bottle out of his son's hand. I waited for him to defend the uniform of the country that made him rich. Calvin just shrugged. He brought the microphone to his lips, looking bored. "Come on, Malik," he sighed, his voice echoing over the speakers. "Don't waste the vintage. That is a $300 bottle. Besides, that suit she's wearing is probably a rental from a pawn shop anyway. Elena, go wipe yourself off in the servants' quarters. You are ruining the vibe." My stomach turned over, but the final dagger came from Renee. My mother stood next to Calvin. She pulled a delicate, lace-trimmed handkerchief from her clutch. She didn't offer it to me. She brought it to her mouth to cover a smile. Her eyes crinkled with a sick, twisted satisfaction. She was enjoying this. She liked seeing the daughter she couldn't control being humiliated by the son she worshipped. That smile broke the last chain binding me to them. The daughter died, and the soldier took full command. If you believe that no amount of money gives someone the right to disrespect a veteran's uniform, please smash that like button and comment, "Respect," right now. Show them that honor still matters. I inhaled deeply. The smell of the sweet wine was cloying, choking me, but underneath it I could still smell the faint, ghostly scent of my grandfather's pipe tobacco from the letter against my chest. I looked Malik in the eye. My gaze was dead. It was the 1,000-yard stare of someone who has seen things this spoiled boy couldn't even imagine in his nightmares. "You didn't just spill a drink, Malik," I said. My voice was low, terrifyingly calm. "You just poured alcohol on a bronze star. That represents the blood of better men than you. You didn't just stain my coat. You just declared war on the honor of the entire Vaughan legacy." Malik scoffed, swaying drunkenly. "Honor? Does honor buy this mansion? Does honor pay for the Ferrari out front?" I smirked. It was a cold, sharp expression that made Malik take a half step back. "No," I replied, "but the truth can take it all away." I didn't shove him. I didn't punch him. I simply extended my arm and brushed him aside with a rigid, controlled motion, as if he were nothing more than a cobweb blocking my path. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of a table, looking shocked that the doormat had pushed back. I didn't stop. I walked past him, past my mother's fading smile, past my father's confused frown. I stepped up onto the stage. I didn't ask for permission to speak. That version of Elena, the one who asked for permission to exist, had drowned in the puddle of champagne on the floor. I stepped up to the microphone stand. Calvin was still holding the mic, his mouth open in a mixture of confusion and annoyance, ready to make another joke at my expense. I didn't give him the chance. I snatched the device from his hand with a grip so violent it nearly dislocated his fingers. Screech! The feedback from the speakers was agonizing. It tore through the humid night air like a banshee's scream. 300 guests in the garden flinched, dropping their hors d'oeuvres and covering their ears. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted their ears to ring. Listen up, I bellowed. I didn't need the microphone. I used my command voice, the voice I had forged in the chaotic din of live fire exercises and sandstorms. It was a voice that vibrated from the diaphragm, designed to cut through explosions, and it easily shattered the fragile politeness of a Hamptons cocktail party. You laugh? I scanned the crowd, my eyes burning into the faces of the people who had mocked me moments ago. You think this uniform is a costume? You think my service is a punchline? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The ocean breeze seemed to stop. Let me remind you of something, I continued, my voice shaking with the intensity of 10 years of suppressed rage. While you sleep soundly on your goose-down pillows that cost $3,000 a night, dreaming of your stock portfolios, my unit is sleeping in holes dug into the dirt. We are eating dust. We are bleeding out in foreign lands to protect the very freedom that allows you to stand here, drink your vintage wine, and act like you are gods among men. The smiles were gone. The arrogance was replaced by the uneasy shifting of feet. I had stripped away the glamour, leaving only the ugly truth of their ingratitude. I turned my body 90 degrees. I faced Calvin. My father looked pale, his double chin trembling. He reached for the mic, but I stepped back, keeping the weapon in my hand. You, I said, pointing a finger at his chest. You have spent my entire life telling me I'm a failure because I don't know how to make money like you. Well, you are wrong, Dad. I am not a failure. I just refuse to play your game. I took a step closer to him, forcing him to retreat against the podium. I don't make money by lying to loyal employees, I declared, my voice echoing off the mansion walls. I don't make money by covering up crimes. And I certainly don't make money by pretending that my son is a genius when he is actually a liability. I swung my hand toward Malik. He was standing at the bottom of the stage steps, looking small and pathetic without his entourage. Look at him, I commanded the audience. Malik, the prince, the heir. Malik flinched as if I had struck him. You think he is the future? I asked, laughing dryly. He is a parasite. He is a tick that has burrowed into the skin of this family, sucking the blood out of the host until there is nothing left. He has never earned a single dollar in his life that wasn't handed to him by Daddy. He's a joke, and every single one of you knows it. You don't applaud him because you respect him. You applaud him because you want a piece of the carcass he is feeding on. Malik opened his mouth to speak, to throw another insult, but no sound came out. He was withered. Without his father's protection, he was nothing. Then the adrenaline dipped, just for a second, as I looked past the men to the woman standing in the shadows. Renee, my mother. She was trembling, clutching her clutch bag like a shield. I lowered the microphone slightly. My voice lost its boom, dropping to a register of profound, aching disappointment. And you, Mother. She looked up, eyes wide with fear. You are the worst of them all, I said. The words tasted like ash. Dad is a monster, yes, but a monster acts according to his nature. You are a coward. Renee let out a small, strangled sob. You watched, I accused her. For 30 years, you watched. You saw him beat me in the rain. You saw him lock me out. You saw him burn my letters. You saw me bleeding, starving for a crumb of affection. And what did you do? I gestured to the bag in her hands. You looked away, I whispered, but the microphones caught every syllable. You chose your silence. You chose your safety. You chose your Hermes bags and your Jimmy Choo shoes over the life of your own daughter. You sold me out for accessories. Renee buried her face in her hands, weeping. But they were crocodile tears. I knew them well. You do not deserve to be a mother, I said, severing the last emotional tie. Tonight, I am no longer your daughter. I am Captain Vaughan, and I am standing here not as your child, but as the executioner of your lies. The shock in the room finally broke. Calvin snapped out of his trance. His face turned a violent shade of beet red. "Security!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get her out of here. She is drunk. She's insane. Drag this bitch off my property." Two large men in black suits started sprinting toward the stage from the perimeter. The crowd gasped, expecting violence. But I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I reached down to the podium where Uncle Vernon had placed the thick dossier. I slammed my hand onto the leather folder. Bam! The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Nobody move," I ordered. It wasn't a request. It was a direct order. The authority in my voice stopped the security guards in their tracks 10 feet from the stage. They hesitated, looking from the furious red-faced billionaire to the woman in the dress blues who looked like she was ready to kill. "Before you put a hand on me," I said, locking eyes with the lead guard, "you better listen very carefully." I held up the dossier. The red wax seal of Otis Vaughan was broken, but the power it held was absolute. "The person standing on this podium is not an intruder," I announced, my voice steady as steel. "According to the last will and testament of Otis Vaughan and the corporate bylaws of this company, I am the only person who has the authority to give orders here tonight." I threw the folder onto the wooden table, the pages fanning out. "This is the final marching order of Otis Vaughan," I declared. "And I am taking command." I stepped back from the microphone, my chest heaving with the adrenaline of the declaration. The echo of the dossier slamming against the podium still hung in the humid air like smoke after a gunshot. Uncle Vernon stepped into the space I had cleared. He didn't look like a tired old man anymore. He looked like a shark in a charcoal suit. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, opened the leather folder, and smoothed out the yellowed pages with a terrifying, clinical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders," Vernon began. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the dry, scratching texture of a judge reading a death sentence. "What you are about to hear is legally binding and notarized." He held up the document. "This is the codicil to the last will and testament of Otis Vaughan, dated October 2010. It states that the controlling 51% of voting shares in Vaughan Holdings is not owned by Calvin. It is held in an irrevocable family trust." Calvin scoffed from the side of the stage, though his laugh sounded wet and nervous. "This is boring legal jargon, Vernon. Nobody cares. Sit down." Vernon ignored him. "Section 4, Paragraph C. The Morality Clause. It stipulates that if the current trustee, that would be you, Calvin, commits financial fraud or attempts to appoint a successor who is mentally incapacitated or has a criminal history, the trust automatically dissolves its current leadership." "That is a lie!" Calvin screamed, lunging forward. But I stepped in his path, my hand resting on my belt. He stopped short. "I am his only son. I am the only heir." Vernon looked over the rim of his glasses. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Yes, Calvin," Vernon said, his voice dripping with ice. "You are his only son, but you are not his only soldier." Vernon reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote control. He pointed it at the massive projection screen behind us, the one intended to display a montage of Malik's glorious life. Click. The screen flickered. The photo of Malik on a yacht vanished. In its place appeared a scanned medical document with a distinct Swiss letterhead: Blue Horizon Clinic, Zurich. The crowd gasped. Blue Horizon was where the ultra-wealthy sent their problems to disappear. "Exhibit A," Vernon narrated calmly. "Malik Vaughan's admission records, diagnosis: severe heroin dependence and antisocial personality disorder. 3 stays in 4 years. Cost: $1.2 million. Malik dropped the magnum of champagne. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound exploding like a grenade. Glass shards flew everywhere, but he didn't move. He stood frozen, his jaw unhinged, looking like a ghost. "That is private medical information," Calvin shrieked, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I will sue you. I will sue everyone." "You can't sue with money you don't have, Calvin," Vernon replied. Click. The screen changed again. This was the kill shot. It was a complex spreadsheet, but the highlighted red columns were simple enough for a child to understand. "Exhibit B," Vernon announced. "Forensic accounting of the Vaughan Holdings Employee Pension Fund." A ripple of genuine panic went through the crowd. These were investors. These were board members. The words pension fund triggered a primal fear in the room. "To pay for Malik's rehab, his Ferraris, and his silenced lawsuits," Vernon explained, pointing to the red numbers, "Calvin has systematically embezzled $40 million from the retirement savings of our workforce." The silence broke. It shattered into a roar of outrage. "$40 million, a man in the front row shouted. "That's federal prison time." My stock, a woman screamed. He destroyed the stock value. The glamorous facade of the Vaughan empire crumbled in seconds. It wasn't a dynasty. It was a Ponzi scheme run by a narcissist to pamper a junkie. Vernon turned to me. He closed the folder with a soft thud. Therefore, he said, his voice cutting through the noise, pursuant to the instructions of Otis Vaughan, the position of trustee and the controlling 51% interest immediately transfer to the reserve beneficiary. He gestured to me. Captain Elena Vaughan. I stood there, soaked in sticky champagne, smelling of alcohol and sweat, my hair a mess. But I had never felt taller. I didn't need a crown. The truth was my crown. As majority shareholder, Vernon continued, Captain Vaughan has absolute veto power over all executive decisions, effective immediately. I looked at Calvin. The arrogant tyrant who had wished me dead was gone. In his place was a trembling, broken old man slumping into a chair, realizing that his greed had just eaten him alive. Malik was on his knees, trying to pick up the pieces of the broken bottle, cutting his hands on the glass, weeping silently. The prince had fallen. I walked back to the microphone. The crowd quieted down instantly. They weren't looking at the outcast anymore. They were looking at the boss. The party is over, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of anger. I didn't need to be angry. I had won. And the reign of greed is over. Starting tomorrow morning, Vaughan Holdings will undergo a complete federal audit. Every penny stolen from the pension fund will be returned, even if I have to liquidate this entire estate to do it. I looked down at the two men who shared my DNA, but not my heart. Now, I said, turning my gaze to the security team standing confused at the perimeter. Mike, escort the former CEO and his son off my property. I pointed to the gate. Immediately. Calvin Vaughan turned a shade of violent crimson, looking like a man on the verge of a cardiac event. He pointed a trembling finger at me, veins bulging in his neck, and screamed at the private security team stationed around the perimeter of the ballroom. Arrest her, he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. I pay your salaries. I pay for your protection. Get this crazy bitch and that old lawyer off my property right now. Throw them in the street. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of a panicked billionaire. 4 large men in black tactical suits stepped away from the walls. They were imposing, built like linebackers, with earpieces coiling down their necks. They began to march toward the podium. The crowd held its breath. This was it. Money versus paper. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, I shifted my feet, spreading them shoulder-width apart, and clasped my hands behind my back in the standard military position of parade rest. I locked eyes with the man leading the charge. His name was Mike. I knew his file. He wasn't just a rent-a-cop. He was a former Army Ranger who had done 3 tours in Iraq. Mike, I said. My voice was calm, conversational, yet it carried across the room with absolute authority. You know the general orders. Who do you serve, Sergeant? The man who signs the check or the Constitution? Mike stopped 10 feet from the stage. The 3 men behind him halted in unison, their discipline overriding their orders from Calvin. The air in the room was pulled tight as a piano wire. Calvin was panting, looking back and forth between us. What are you doing? I gave you a direct order. Grab her. Mike looked at Calvin, then he looked at me. He looked at the bronze star pinned to my chest, stained with sticky champagne, but shining under the stage lights. He looked at the frantic, dishonorable man screaming for violence against his own daughter. Then, the plot twisted. Mike snapped his heels together. Clack. He stood at perfect attention, rigid as a board. He raised his right hand, fingers flat and aligned, bringing the tip of his forefinger to the brim of his imaginary cover in a crisp, sharp salute. Good evening, Captain, Mike said, his voice ringing out. Ma'am. Behind him, the 3 other guards, all veterans, snapped to attention and saluted. Calvin's jaw dropped. He looked like he had been slapped in the face with a wet fish. Mike lowered his hand and turned to face my father. His demeanor shifted from soldier to enforcer. I apologize, Mr. Vaughan, Mike said, his tone icy. We are contracted to protect the assets and leadership of Vaughan Holdings. According to the legal documents just presented by corporate counsel, Captain Elena is the legal owner of this estate. That makes you a trespasser. Trespasser? Calvin sputtered. I built this house. You are currently disturbing the peace and threatening the owner, Mike continued, stepping into Calvin's personal space. I suggest you stand down. It was the ultimate humiliation. Calvin realized in that split second that his millions could buy muscle, but they couldn't buy loyalty. He had lost the room. He had lost the physical force, but we weren't done. From the main entrance, the heavy double doors flew open with a force that rattled the hinges. A dozen figures swarmed into the ballroom. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing navy blue windbreakers with 3 yellow capital letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. Flanking them were officers from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Uncle Vernon had been very, very busy. The lead agent walked straight up to the stage, flashing a badge. "Calvin Vaughan," the agent asked. Calvin slumped against the podium, all the fight draining out of him. "Yes?" "You are under arrest for federal tax evasion, securities fraud, and the embezzlement of $40 million from a protected pension fund." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut, click, 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 was the loudest sound in the Hamptons that night. It was cold, mechanical, and final. Malik, seeing his father in cuffs, panicked. He tried to slink off the stage, aiming for the service exit behind the DJ booth. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He didn't make it 3 steps. Mike, the security chief, moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He grabbed Malik by the collar of his expensive Armani suit and hoisted him off the ground like a wet cat. Malik's feet dangled uselessly in the air. "Not so fast, Prince," Mike growled. "There is a K9 unit waiting by your Ferrari. They found a significant amount of controlled substances in the glove box. The local police are waiting for you outside." "Get your hands off me," Malik whined, thrashing weakly. "Do you know who I am?" "Yeah," Mike said, handing him over to a waiting federal agent. "You are inmate number 2. Then came the parade. The FBI agents escorted Calvin and Malik off the stage and down the center aisle of the ballroom. It was a perp walk for the history books. The 300 guests, the senators, the CEOs, the socialites who had laughed at me 15 minutes ago, parted like the Red Sea. But they didn't look away in shame. They pulled out their iPhones. Flashes went off. Dozens of screens lit up as the elite of New York live-streamed the downfall of their friend. "I can't believe it," I heard a woman whisper, aiming her camera at Calvin's cuffed wrists. "Stealing from the pension fund? Disgusting." They turned on him instantly. The loyalty of the rich is as thin as the rim of a crystal glass. I stood alone on the podium, watching the red and blue emergency lights flickering through the tall windows. I watched the agents press my father's head down to protect it as they shoved him into the back of a black SUV. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I just felt a profound, heavy pity. They had everything. Money, power, influence. And they lost it all because they couldn't be decent human beings. The empire of Vaughan Holdings had collapsed in a single night, not because of market forces, but because it was built on a foundation of lies. The sirens wailed, fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. Justice had been served. But the cleanup was just beginning. The wail of the police sirens faded into the distance, swallowed by the humid night air of the Hamptons. The ballroom was quiet now. The music had stopped. The 300 guests had fled like rats scuttling from a sinking ship, eager to upload their videos and distance themselves from the scandal. The only sound left was the swish-swish of brooms as the cleaning staff swept up the shards of the broken champagne bottle and the glass from Malik's shattered ego. I stood at the foot of the stage, my adrenaline crashing, leaving me feeling hollowed out. There was one person left, Renee, my mother. She was collapsing on a plush velvet chaise lounge near the ice sculpture, weeping theatrically. Her mascara was running in black rivers down her face, ruining her foundation. When she saw me step down from the podium, she didn't look at me with concern. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't offer to help clean the sticky, drying alcohol from my uniform. She lunged at me. Her hands, manicured to perfection, grabbed my wrist with a desperate strength. "Elena," she wailed, her voice shrill. "What have you done? That is your father. You just sent your father to federal prison. Are you insane?" I looked down at her hands clutching my sleeve. They were shaking. "Call Vernon," she demanded, shaking me. "Tell him to stop this. Tell him it was a mistake. We can fix this. We can pay them back quietly." I gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off my arm. It felt like removing a leech. "Mom," I said, my voice flat. "He embezzled $40 million. He stole from the pension fund. That is a federal crime. I can't fix that. Nobody can." Renee's face crumpled. She switched tactics instantly. The anger evaporated, replaced by the weapon she had used against me for 30 years. Guilt. I know he has a temper, she sniffled, looking up at me with wide, watery eyes, the same look she used to get out of speeding tickets. But he loves you, Elena, in his own way, and I love you. You know that, right? I have always loved you. She reached for my hand again, but I stepped back. You love me? I repeated. Is that why you laughed when Malik poured wine on my medals? Is that why you looked at your shoes when Dad wished I was dead? I was scared, she cried, pressing a hand to her chest. I had to keep the peace. I wanted to keep this family warm and safe. I did it for us. Don't you have a heart? Do you want your mother out on the street? Do you want me homeless? There it was, the naked truth. She wasn't crying because she missed her husband. She wasn't crying because her son was in jail. She was crying because her ATM had just been confiscated by the FBI. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I didn't see a mother. I saw a survivor, a woman who had traded her spine for a platinum credit card. You didn't stay silent to protect the family, Mom, I said, my voice quiet but cutting deep. You stayed silent to protect your lifestyle. When he beat me, where were you? When he locked me out in the rain, where were you? A real mother takes the bullet for her child. She doesn't use her child as a human shield. Renee opened her mouth to argue, but I reached into the pocket of my damp trousers. I pulled out a folded check I'd written earlier that morning with Uncle Vernon. I held it out to her. Here, I said. She took it automatically. Her eyes scanned the numbers. $50,000. What is this? She whispered. Severance pay, I replied. That is enough to rent a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens for 6 months. It is enough for food and utilities. Queens, she gasped, looking at me as if I had suggested she live in a dumpster. Elena, I live in the Hamptons. Not anymore, I said coldly. This estate is now under my management, and I don't harbor enablers. You have 6 months to find a job, Mom. Learn to type, learn to file, do what normal people do. You can't be serious, she hissed, her sorrow instantly replaced by venom. I am your mother. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I said. I am not going to support a woman who watched me bleed for 30 years and did nothing but check her makeup in the reflection of the pool of my blood. Renee clutched the check to her chest. She knew I meant it. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and pure hatred. You are cruel, Elena, she spat, her voice trembling with rage. You are cold. You are exactly like your grandfather Otis. I smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. Thank you, I said. That is the best compliment you have ever given me. I turned my back on her. I walked toward the main entrance where Mike was waiting by the open doors. Elena, she screamed after me. Don't you walk away from me, Elena. I didn't break stride. I didn't look back. I looked at Mike. Mike, I ordered softly. Please escort Mrs. Vaughan off the premises and issue a memo to security. Starting tomorrow morning, she is barred from the estate and the corporate headquarters. Understood, ma'am, Mike nodded. I walked out into the cool night air. Behind me, I heard the heavy oak doors swing shut. Boom. The sound was heavy, final, and absolute. It sounded like a prison cell closing, but for me, it sounded like freedom. Cutting out the toxicity hurt. It felt like amputating a limb. But as I stood there under the stars, taking the first breath of my new life, I knew it was the only way to survive. The cord was finally cut. 1 year later. The lobby of the Vaughan Holdings headquarters in Manhattan felt different. The air was lighter. The hushed, fearful whispers that used to echo off the marble floors had been replaced by the energetic hum of people who actually wanted to be there. The first thing I did as chairman of the board was remove the 10-foot oil painting of Calvin Vaughan that used to loom over the reception desk like a deity. In its place, we installed the wall of foundations. It was a mosaic of photographs honoring the employees who had given 20, 30, or 40 years of their lives to this company. The janitors, the secretaries, the line managers, the people whose retirement savings I had clawed back, dollar by dollar. I sat at the head of the boardroom table, but I wasn't running the day-to-day operations. I knew my strengths. I was a soldier, a protector, not a corporate shark. So, I hired a CEO, a brilliant woman from Chicago with a spine of steel and a moral compass that pointed true north. The pension fund is fully solvent, Madam Chair, she reported, sliding a binder across the mahogany table. And profits are stable. We aren't making the obscene margins your father did, but we are sleeping better at night. I smiled. That is the only metric I care about. But my real work wasn't in the boardroom. That afternoon, I drove out to the Hamptons. The iron gates of the Vaughan estate swung open, but the gold-plated V was gone. A new, modest wooden sign hung by the entrance. The Otis Recovery Center. I had liquidated the luxury cars. I had auctioned off the art. I used the money to transform the monument of my family's greed into a sanctuary for the broken. The ballroom, where Malik had poured champagne on my uniform, was no longer filled with socialites and sycophants. The crystal chandeliers were still there, but beneath them sat a circle of folding chairs. I walked in quietly. A group of 12 men and women were sitting in a circle. Some were missing limbs. All were missing a piece of their souls, lost to the horrors of war or the trauma of domestic abuse. This was a PTSD support group. I didn't go to the front. I didn't take a microphone. I took an empty chair in the back of the circle. Here, I wasn't the heiress or the captain. I was just Elena. I listened as a young Marine corporal spoke about his nightmares. The room didn't smell of expensive perfume and judgment anymore. It smelled of stale coffee and raw honesty. For the first time in its history, this house was serving a purpose. It was healing the very wounds my father used to mock. When the session ended, I walked out to the gravel driveway. My ride wasn't a limousine. It was a dusty 3-year-old Ford F-150 pickup truck. Sitting in the passenger seat, tail thumping rhythmically against the door, was Tripod. He was a golden retriever I'd pulled from a kill shelter. He was missing his back left leg, but he had a smile that could light up a blackout. I climbed in and scratched him behind the ears. Ready to go home, buddy? We drove away from the ocean, heading inland toward a small cabin tucked away in the woods of upstate New York. It was tiny compared to the mansion, but it had something the estate never had: warmth. As I pulled up the dirt driveway, I saw smoke curling from the stone chimney. A man was chopping wood on the porch. Mark stopped mid-swing and wiped sweat from his forehead. He wasn't a billionaire heir. He was a former Army combat medic. He was the man who had patched up my shrapnel wounds in the Kandahar Valley. He was the only man who had seen me cry in the dirt and never once called me weak. He smiled as I stepped out of the truck. He didn't ask about the stock price. He asked if I was hungry. We sat on the porch as the sun began to dip below the tree line, eating simple stew from ceramic bowls. Tripod slept at our feet. There were no cameras, no press releases, no expectations. I realized then that family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. Family is the place where you are allowed to be weak and are still loved. Family is the people who help you carry your pack when the weight gets too heavy. 2 days later, I made one final trip. The morning air at Arlington National Cemetery was crisp and still. Rows of white marble headstones stretched out to the horizon, a silent army standing guard for eternity. I found the stone I was looking for. Otis Vaughan, U.S. Marine Corps, World War II. I knelt in the grass. The damp cold seeped into my jeans, but I didn't mind. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of me, Mark, and Tripod, standing in front of the new recovery center, surrounded by smiling veterans. I propped the photo against the white stone. "Hey, Grandpa," I whispered. The wind rustled the oak trees overhead, like a soft reply. "I didn't become the shark Dad wanted me to be," I said, tracing the letters of his name. "I became the watcher you taught me to be. The perimeter is secure. The troops are taken care of." I stood up. I brushed the grass from my knees and snapped my heels together. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my hand in a salute. It wasn't a salute to a superior officer. It was a salute to a father figure who had saved my life from beyond the grave. "Mission accomplished, sir." I held the salute for a long moment, letting the last of the grief drain away into the hallowed ground. Then, I dropped my hand. I turned around. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold. My shadow stretched out long and unbroken across the green grass. I walked toward the exit, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past was buried. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I was free. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with the most important truth I learned. Not in the army, but in that mansion. We are raised to believe that blood is thicker than water, and that we must endure abuse just because it comes from family. That is a lie. Your worth is never defined by the people who refuse to see your value, even if those people are your parents. True family isn't about DNA, it is about who stands beside you when you are bleeding. If you are the black sheep because you refuse to be toxic, wear that title with pride. It doesn't mean you are broken, It means you were the strong one who finally broke the cycle. Now, I want to turn the floor over to you. Have you ever had to make the painful decision to cut ties with a family member to save your own peace? Or have you found your own chosen family in unexpected places, just like I found with Mark? Please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your story might give someone else the courage to stand up. If my battle for justice today gave you hope, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where honor always wins. Until next time, stand tall.